The morning it all happened began like any other, quiet, slow, and heavy with the stillness that follows a long night of thinking. Sunlight tried to push through the thin curtains, but even the light seemed tired, as if it knew what was coming. I had woken early, out of habit more than necessity. Ever since Mom passed, sleep never came easily. The house felt different without her, emptier, colder, and filled with shadows of memories that refused to fade. I made tea for Dad and myself, placing his cup on the kitchen table exactly the way he liked it. For a few minutes, I stood there waiting, listening to the old clock ticking against the wall. Each tick felt like a warning, like the universe was telling me that something was wrong. Dad's footsteps finally echoed down the hallway. He entered the kitchen without a greeting, which wasn't unusual these days. We both carried grief in ways that left little space for conversation. He didn't touch his tea. Instead, he looked at me with a strange tension around his eyes, guilt, hesitation, and something else I couldn't quite name. "Come to the living room when you're done," he said, voice flat, almost mechanical. That was when the uneasiness in my stomach sharpened. I followed him after a moment, wiping my hands on a towel even though they weren't wet. When I stepped into the living room, he was already seated, a thick brown folder on the coffee table in front of him. He didn't look up when I sat across from him. He took a long breath, his fingers tapping on the folder as though debating whether to open it. "I made a decision," he said finally. His voice was controlled but lacked its usual steadiness. "A hard one." I frowned. "What decision?" He pushed the folder toward me. "Open it." My heart beat faster as I slowly unfastened the metal clip and slid out the papers. Legal documents, property transfer forms, deeds. At first, my brain refused to understand the words on the page. It felt like I was reading something in a foreign language. But then everything clicked at once, like puzzle pieces snapping violently into place. "Dad," my voice was barely a whisper. "What is this?" "It's done," he said before I could finish. "The farm, the land, the savings account." He paused, then added with chilling calmness, "I sold it." I stared at him, stunned, my fingers frozen on the papers. "Sold? To who? When? Why would you?" "We needed the money," he cut in sharply. There was no other choice. My throat tightened. "Dad, that land is worth hundreds of thousands. Why would you sell it so cheap?" "For $50,000, he said, ignoring my question entirely. The number hit me like a punch. 50,000, everything my mother had worked for, the land my grandfather spent decades nurturing, the home I grew up in, gone for the price of a used car. I tried to steady my breath. "Dad, why didn't you talk to me first? Why didn't you tell me?" He leaned back, expression hardening. "I'm your father. I don't need your permission to do anything. And you should be grateful." My chest stung. Grateful? For what? For selling everything we had without even telling me. For everything I've done for you. He snapped. "I gave you food, a home, an education. Do you think that came for free? You owe me." I stared at him in disbelief. This wasn't the man I remembered. The man who taught me how to plant saplings, who helped Mom bake bread in the old kitchen, who promised her on her last night that he'd protect me in the home she loved. Grief had changed him, yes, but this wasn't grief alone. This was something darker, fear, desperation, maybe even shame. "But that land," my voice trembled. "Mom wanted me to have it. She told me." He slammed his hand on the armrest. "Don't bring her into this." The room fell silent except for the pounding of my heart. I felt tears filling my eyes, but I blinked them away. His anger wasn't what hurt me most. It was the coldness behind it, the complete absence of remorse. He had sold our history, our legacy, without hesitation. And he expected gratitude. When I finally found my voice, it was small, fragile. "Dad, you didn't just sell land. You sold our life. You sold everything we had left of her." He looked away, jaw clenched, refusing to answer. In that moment, something inside me cracked, not just my trust in him, but my belief that family was always safe, always sacred. The papers in front of me suddenly felt heavier than any weight I had ever carried. They weren't just documents. They were proof that the world I knew had ended, not with Mom's death, but with my father's betrayal. And nothing would ever be the same again. The truth didn't reveal itself all at once. It came in fragments, whispers, accidental comments, suspicious glances, like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't meant to solve. But once those pieces fell into place, the picture was clear. Nothing about the sale was an accident. It started with Mom's nurse, Elena. She had stayed with us during my mother's final months, helping with medications and comforting us when the nights grew too heavy. Even after Mom passed, Elena visited occasionally, just to check on me. She knew how much the farmhouse meant to our family, especially to Mom. One afternoon, a few days after Dad revealed what he'd done, Elena dropped by with homemade soup. She looked around the house, noticing the tension in the air. I hadn't told her anything yet, but she sensed the heaviness. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. I forced a smile, but it melted quickly. "He sold everything," I whispered. Her expression fell. I heard rumors, but I didn't want to believe them. I froze. "Rumors? What rumors?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "Mark has been visiting your father for months. I overheard them arguing once, about money, land, and closing the deal before someone else got involved. I didn't understand it then, but now." Her voice softened. "I think he pressured your father." The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls, which once held laughter, now echoed betrayal. Mark had always been around, loud, careless, always searching for opportunities. I remembered how he used to brag about flipping properties, about turning people's misfortunes into profit. I thanked Elena and walked her to the door, but my mind was turning fiercely. Pieces of memory came rushing back. Dad hiding bills, drinking more often, snapping over insignificant things. I had assumed it was grief. I didn't know he was drowning in debt. That evening, I sat at the dining table waiting for Dad. He walked in with the same tired expression, but when he saw me sitting stiffly at the table, his eyes narrowed. "You look like you want to ask something," he said, voice heavy. I didn't waste time. "Why didn't you tell me Mark was involved?" His jaw tightened. "Who told you that? Does it matter?" I shot back. "Is it true?" He looked away, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand. It was complicated." "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Why him? Why 50,000? Why hide everything from me?" He sank into a chair, shoulders sagging. "Because you worry too much. And because I didn't need another argument." He paused, then added, "Mark offered cash. Quick, no paperwork fights. And you trusted him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He's been circling our land since Mom got sick. You know that." Dad's expression hardened. "He was helping me." "Helping?" I laughed bitterly. "He stole the farm out of your hands." Dad's voice rose. "It's my property. Mine. I did what I had to do." "No, Dad," I said quietly. "You did what was easiest. What hurt the least for you?" He slammed his fist on the table. "I was drowning. You don't know what it's like to lose your wife and carry debts alone." I needed a way out. My heart softened, just a little. I understood his grief. I felt it every single day. But grief didn't justify destroying everything Mom valued. "Dad," I whispered, "we could have found another way. We could have sold a small part of the land. We could have talked to a bank, sold equipment, anything but selling the whole inheritance for pennies to a man who only wanted to profit from us. That wasn't survival. That was surrender." He looked at me with eyes full of shame, but also stubborn pride, the kind that refuses to admit fault. "You think it was easy for me," he said quietly. "It wasn't, but I couldn't face you. I couldn't tell you how bad things were. You always look at me like I'm supposed to fix everything." I swallowed hard. "I never asked you to fix everything. I asked you to trust me." He didn't respond. The silence between us grew heavier. Finally, he whispered, "I thought I was doing the right thing." "The right thing?" My voice cracked. "Selling Mom's land behind my back. Giving it to a man who never cared about our family. You didn't even hesitate." He stood abruptly. "Enough." And that was it. Conversation over. Truth half shown, half hidden, like always. But as Dad walked away, I realized something painful. He didn't sell the land because he had no choice. He sold it because he didn't believe I deserved to be part of the decision. In his eyes, I was still the child he fed and sheltered, not the adult who cared for his dying wife. Not the person Mom trusted. Not the one who stayed. Mark was the easy answer. I was the complication he chose to erase. In that moment, the betrayal became complete, not because of the sale, but because he chose a stranger's voice over mine. The morning Mark's construction crew arrived was the morning I realized the fight was already over, even if I hadn't accepted it yet. Their trucks rumbled like machines of war, disturbing the silence of the land I grew up on. Dust rose behind them as they drove across the familiar dirt path, once the same road where I learned to ride my bicycle, where Mom used to walk with me holding my tiny hand. Now strangers were walking through our yard with clipboards and spray paint cans. They wore heavy boots that sank into the soil my grandparents once tended with bare feet. Every step they took felt like an insult. From the porch, I watched them scatter across the fields, marking trees, measuring boundaries, photographing the land like it was some abandoned property waiting to be rebuilt, not a home full of memories. I felt a burn in my chest. Not anger alone, something deeper. A feeling of being uprooted from my own life. One of the workers pointed at the old oak tree near the barn, the tree where Mom used to hang lanterns during summer nights. The worker shook his head, clicked his pen, and marked a large red X on the trunk. It was such a small gesture, yet it felt like someone had struck me. That was when my breath broke. This wasn't just a sale. It was an erasure, a rewriting of everything that came before. I stepped down from the porch, unable to stay still. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of the earth, an old familiar scent, but now it carried bitterness. I walked past the barn, past the vegetable patch where Mom taught me how to plant tomatoes, all the way to the oak tree. I touched the bark where the red X glared back at me. My fingers trembled. You deserved better, I whispered to the tree, to the land, to the memories buried beneath its roots. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Dad approached slowly, hesitant, as if he knew he had no right to come any closer but still felt compelled to try. "They're just doing their job," he said quietly. I didn't turn around. "Their job is destroying our home. It's not your home anymore," he replied, the words heavy and final. I spun to face him, hurt slicing through my chest. "How can you say that? This is where Mom lived. This is where she died. This is where I gave everything." He flinched, but his expression hardened again, the same way it had in the living room days earlier. "We needed the money. I told you. You didn't need to sell the whole farm," I said, voice shaking. "You didn't need to sell it to Mark. You didn't need to lie to me." He swallowed but didn't respond. "And you didn't need to erase me from the decision," I added softly. That was the one sentence he couldn't argue with. Silence. He looked away, as if eye contact would force him to admit he had crossed a line he could never step back from. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The workers continued their inspection, shouting measurements across the field. Birds scattered from the noise. Even nature felt disturbed. A single truth began to settle in my heart, heavy, sad, but undeniable. I couldn't save the land. But I could save myself. I turned toward the house, feeling Dad's eyes on me. Inside, I moved on instinct. I found my old suitcase in the closet, the same one I used when I left for college years ago. I began packing, not carefully, not thoughtfully, just quickly. I grabbed clothes, some photos of Mom, her scarf, her recipe notebook. My hands paused on the kitchen counter where we once laughed while making bread. Then I kept packing. Dad stood in the doorway. "You're leaving." I didn't answer immediately. I zipped the suitcase and faced him. His face was lined with regret, but not enough to stop what was happening. "You made your choice," I said softly. "Now I'm making mine." He took a step forward. "Don't do this." I shook my head. "Dad, you taught me to stand on my own. But that means I can also walk away when something is destroying me." "I'm not destroying you," he said, almost begging. "You didn't just sell land," I replied. "You broke trust. You broke us." His shoulders fell. He had no defense left. I rolled the suitcase to the front door. The house felt unfamiliar, like a stranger's home. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "If Mom were here," I whispered, "she'd ask us to take care of each other. But you didn't take care of me, Dad. You took care of your mistakes." He didn't deny it. His silence was an admission. I opened the door. Cold air brushed against my face. "Someday," he said from behind me, voice cracking, "you'll understand why I did it." I stepped outside without turning back. "And someday, Dad," I replied, "you'll realize what you lost." I walked down the path, past the fields, past the oak tree, toward a future that terrified me but also freed me. Behind me, my old life crumbled, but ahead of me, a new one was beginning. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the smallest spark of hope.